This podcast represents my opinion and the opinion of my guests. This is not medical advice, and I am not establishing a patient-physician relationship with any listener. The content here should not be taken as medical advice. The content here is for informational purposes only, and because each patient is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions you may have.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Not Your Doc podcast. I'm your host, Vanessa, and I'm here with our producer, Seth.
Oh, hey, everybody. Sorry, you caught me off guard.
And Mr. Not Your Doc himself, Dr. Charles Tadros. How you doing today, Dr. Tadros?
Yeah, pretty well, thank you.
I was waiting for you to say doctor. I forget. He's the doctor.
It works out.
Whoever. Yeah.
If you listen to the first part of this episode, you know why.
Yeah, exactly. Because he killed a man. No, just kidding. Just kidding. So this is sort of the second part of our conversation about failure. Mm-hmm. And so our first part, we definitely encourage listeners to go back and take a listen to, was sort of about our personal experiences with what we called failures. Mm-hmm. And we kind of analyzed them as a group and did a really cool exercise with that. Definitely encourage you to check that out if you haven't listened to it.
And apply it to yourself.
And apply it to yourself, definitely. And sort of this is the natural progression of the conversation into a second part, which is kind of about how society and our culture set up our traditional definitions of success and failure, and how to maybe reframe that too.
And society is not just global or just American, but also even at the microscopic level in your own household, your own cultural norms,
absolutely.
Expectations.
Okay, so set us up for this conversation, Dr. Tadros. Tell us how you think about this, and then sort of how you want us to think about this.
Yeah, sure. I think about society as one of the jobs of society. One of the jobs of any culture is kind of a collective brain, is a collective memory that remembers everything from wisdoms, and that includes the positive stuff, what to do, and the caveats, the warnings. Sure. So, for instance, whenever we hear older folks say it takes a village to raise kids, it's kind of letting us know, it's kind of a short statement, these pithy little proverbs, as that let us know that we're not alone in these difficult tasks, especially tasks that we may not be familiar with, we don't think we're good at, and that there are other people around us, experienced people around us to help us. So that's kind of that one statement. That's what it means to me. So wisdom, societal wisdom, sometimes is codified, is put into law, into rules of the road that we learn when we're 15 or 16, so we can get our license. So that's wisdom. Whenever we take a driver's test, it's practical stuff. Stopping, car lengths before stopping, and dry pavement versus wet pavement. Coming to full stop. All these things are actually wisdom. It's not just rules for the heck of it, but actually wisdom that's put into rules, and and society tends to work better on average.
Right. Yeah. They're not just arbitrary.
That's right.
It's based on experience. Right.
Traditionally, old days, wisdom was oral or visual. It was not just, that's why we have stories, poetry, and song, dance, all these things. All sorts of stories are told. Information is passed on that way. It's sometimes easier for us to remember and understand it. Pictures and stories and videos nowadays. The obvious problem is the wisdom now that we can spread it very quickly. Twitter, Instagram, all these things, is that oftentimes people make it sound as if it's a blanket statement. That it's just a little pithy statement, covers all truths for all times, for every individual, for all situations, and that's where we get into trouble. That because it sounds cool, it sounds clean and short, and rhymes sometimes, that it's true, and it's true for everybody at all the times. And oftentimes it's not. And so oftentimes whenever we run up against societal norms or societal wisdoms that don't seem to work out for us, that sometimes we're the one that is wrong, that we're the blame, that we didn't follow, we didn't understand it, we didn't learn, we didn't listen, we didn't follow, and we're the one, to the point where sometimes it's immoral, unethical, some of the stuff that we didn't work out for us. So then therefore what follows, what we've talked about, Brene Brown and a lot of people have talked about, is the shame and the guilt and the embarrassment of what appears to be failures. You know, you didn't make the team, or didn't make it into because you didn't seemingly, quote unquote, try hard enough or work hard enough, because that's what the norms of society is, that if you work hard that you will achieve, and if it doesn't work out for you, that somehow there's something wrong with you and you didn't have a work ethic.
Right,
absolutely. So yeah, that's a good start.
All right, so let me reflect that back to you to make sure that I'm following your thinking here.
At least one person's ideas. Yes.
So, wisdom, this societal wisdom, is kind of coded language for a definition of success or failure, right? So I mean, like, I feel like sometimes there's almost an implication like, well, it's wise to do this, as if it's like a suggestion, but wisdom definitely has like an undertone of like, this is the right way.
Yeah, there's a right way and a wrong way.
Right way and a
better
wrong
way than everybody else's.
An
way.
acceptable way, or maybe unacceptable.
That's right.
And so those social and cultural expectations aren't, like we said, they're not just arbitrary. They're informed by centuries sometimes of experience, right? Sometimes with family, like the nuclear family has been what has sustained humanity for 1,000 years or whatever, and so we have to continue that. Or in more modern terms, with education and career goals, that you have to follow a very specific stepwise set of achievements in order to end up with a good career. And it definitely seems to me that the wisdom and the expectations are always given with a good intention, right?
Yeah, sure, of course.
But the impact of them is not universally positive, right?
Yes, yeah.
Because the wisdom, the blanket statement, like you said, doesn't fit everybody in every situation at every point in their lives.
That's correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want us to talk about some of the ones that you brought up here, kind of breaking down into 4 categories. So, societal wisdom about family, education, work, and then interpersonal kind of relationships. So let's start off with family. What do you feel like is kind of the main message that society is telling us about family?
Well, I mean, so people will quote studies and we always have to be careful. Just because something is published in a reputable journal doesn't mean it's always accurate or applies to the situation, because good studies are very narrow in their scope, right? So this is all sorts of, whether it's criminology or biochemistry, is very narrow in its scope. Any good study, it's very hard to make a study that's expansive and get it published because it's just massive, all the potential confounding factors. So for family, the idea is that, people get married, they get to know each other, they get married, they get a house, they have children, they work regularly and they retire and stuff like that. There's a stepwise, and on average, it'll work out for a lot of people. A lot of people work out. But the problem is if that's not your nature, if that's not how you were brought up, that's not your inkling, that's not your gut feeling, that's not where you are in life whenever you sense these things that So that's one of the things. So it's not that the nuclear family doesn't work. It's that, if it's kind and loving and all sorts of supportive, all sorts of stuff, yes, it's a much better chance of working. But sometimes a nuclear family is harmful. Sometimes staying together, mom and dad staying together in an abusive relationship, or there's drug abuse and stuff like that, is actually potentially harmful for those patients, those adults, and especially for the youngsters. So that's part of the issue that we run into. And the other thing, of course, is that we move away from our friends and our childhood friends and our families, or our supports, and we kind of set up shop, our lives elsewhere, following jobs or whatever. How we have to, and if you don't want to have a nuclear family in your new location, how we still want people to have a good life, what they determine to be a good life. So I think we have to kind of be accepting with the rest of us who may think that, well, there's a primary way, and then there are all the other ways, and good luck with the other ways.
Sure.
A lot of people do the other, quote unquote, other ways. How can they be? How do we support them? How can they be successful? How can we interact and live with each other?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good point at the end there. That how can we support how can we be accepting and how can we support people who are choosing these,
Yeah,
know,
we
quote
don't
unquote
have to
alternative ways of doing things?
Alternative to us.
Alternative to us, yeah,
right,
to
And for them, it's common or normal
Yeah.
or accepted, or within their friend group or whatever
Yeah.
cultural group is very acceptable. And where the other people are aberrations. So it's part of this stuff. And people say, well, if I accept you, then that means that I have to be like you, and therefore I have to condone. And the answer is absolutely not.
Yeah. And we're not talking about like deviance here, like
No,
people
right.
having romantic relationships with their animals or something
Right.
like that.
Yeah,
I mean, this is
severe
this
stuff,
is
right.
just different family structures. Sometimes
right.
it's a blended family. Sometimes
Right.
it's two men in a relationship, two women in a relationship,
Yes.
children, no children,
Right.
adopted children.
Yeah.
Aunts and uncles and cousins living together. I mean, there are so many different ways that family can look like, that
That's right.
community can look like.
Right.
Have you seen it ever in patients where they have this like very rigid idea of what
Sure.
family should have looked like for them or should look like for them, that kind of limits them from making actually better choices?
No, I mean, you and I know we're the first easy one. There's some our population, our patients' population that's transgender.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the very obvious ones that come to mind. Oftentimes, they're born into families that didn't understand, didn't know, are not accepting, and it's very hard for people to come out and express it. As youngsters, they don't understand how to express it, etc. And and nowadays, it's much more public and much more discussion. Sometimes it's not discussion. Sometimes it's kind of yelling and etc. But this is something where now I have to step back and say, hey, maybe that's not what I understand, what I believe, what I see, what I feel.
Right.
But it's there, and these are real people. These are one-on-one, wonderful, just like any other person I run into. I mean, so this is the shame of it all, and it's always a challenge. It's a challenge, and people don't want to be wrong.
Sure.
They don't want to be corrected, especially in public. They don't want to be embarrassed. But also, how do you get to know about how other people live, how the people believe, how people see themselves or other people? So you have to be around and ask. So.
I think too, there's, like we were saying, that in the wisdom, there's sort of an implied definition of what success is and what failure is.
Yeah.
And I have a almost 4-month-old at home right now, but I was, one of the, I'm an older parent, right? I'm 33, having my first child. My husband and I had our first child.
Congrats.
And for a while, we weren't sure if we wanted to have kids at all.
Sure.
And I know lots of other people who are intentionally remaining childless or are not sure if they want to have children.
Right.
And there's a lot of pressure, and there tend to be a lot of value judgments against people who
Yes.
don't have children for whatever reason or who have chosen not to have children.
Within certain culture, within certain
Yeah.
little micro cultures within, but because there are other people your age and younger and older who don't have children, same thing. So you would be accepted within those folds of people.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think that in that sense that the cultural wisdom of you have to be a 2-parent family with 2.5 children and live in a house with a picket fence and the dog and the car and the whole 9 yards. Like there's
nobody questions you. If you get those, nobody questions you. That's the key. It's like you can cruise on that one. People just assume that that's
like you're not a bona fide person or a bona fide citizen or a bona fide success, right? So that's sort of what we talked about. It's like the success with the capital S is rich, you're wealthy, you have a good
stable, financially stable,
all
right?
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and so this is. I mean, it's important. I certainly grew up in a very rigid way of thinking, and how my family was raised me, and the modeling and the role models, and the people around my neighborhood, the same. We're settled in a neighborhood that reinforced our beliefs and behaviors.
Right.
So I mean, this is the whenever you go out into the world, you meet. This is why people oftentimes have to leave to go to college and stuff like that, is because they need to see other things. Otherwise, your grade school through high school and whatever else is the same. Gang of people. Yeah.
So the other one that I feel like sort of falls underneath family is like this sort of message or assumption that like you, unless you are very religious or observant, or unless you are not unless you are secular, that you can't have a good life.
Right.
That there's no like you either have to be super religious according to your, the in-group that you want to be a part of, or you have to be very secular according to the in-group that you're a part of, and that there's sort of no in between.
Yes.
And I mean, I could speak like personally, that's been a very challenging, piece of wisdom for me to navigate, being raised in a very, very devout and religious home. That it's somewhere in the middle for me is actually where the truth lies. And I'm the one that has to come to my own decision about what set of expectations is going to work for me.
Yep. It's a struggle. It's an existential struggle that you're trying to do while you take care of the baby and go to work and everything else. You still have that, the bigger question about these things. And this is, I think, and sometimes we run into teens and preteens that are already worried about these things. Yeah. And they, talk about anxious kids. They're not just worried about their friend group and stuff. They're worried about war. They're worried about God, and they're worried about all sorts of humongous.
Global warming. And,
humongous. No wonder they're anxious, and because there's no way to resolve it, so you can finish your day and go on and have a nice day. So so this is, I think, a lot of stuff is the journey, is the struggle. What do you say? The struggle is the way, or the struggle is the path. For Stoics. So not to be afraid of the struggle, but also to know that there are people out there that hopefully will guide you and challenge you appropriately, but not be threatening. And that's always hard balance to, if you bring it up, to not feel threatened to whenever you bring up questions.
Right.
Yeah.
I definitely think too, as you brought up before with, Twitter and social media and all the different ways that we face that, those very rigid expectations and definitions of success and happiness and beauty. When that's in your face all the time, especially as a young person, like, it's extremely hard to learn that there's nuance to so many different things and many alternatives to success. Your path forward can look so many different ways.
Unfortunately, people come to us for more medications because they don't feel successful, because they feel that they're wrong or something's wrong with them, and then a lot of stuff is to say, part of it is that you didn't realize that you were checking yourself. You were being measured from outside, and you're measuring yourself. Yeah. And some of this stuff should not automatically. This is some of the challenging questions whenever you do therapy. It's like, why do you assume that you have to be a whatever, or you ought to be, or just because you have these options that you should partake, or you should choose a harder one or the bigger one. So all these things are part of therapy. And a lot of times people will realize that they're happy where they are. They do the circuitous path, and they come back where they're, nope, I should be living in this town. Nope, I should be in this faith. Nope, I should be in this marriage. So it's not that they decide to, dump it and run, but they actually come back through after hard work and now adult thinking, not just absorbing it as a youngster from family. And they come back and they said, yep, this faith, this relationship is what I should be doing, just like I've already been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said, that doing it the hardest way or the most challenging way is not necessarily a requirement. Can you talk about how that applies, like with education specifically, and how that's kind of a piece of wisdom that sets people up for failure sometimes?
And it's my big fat Greek wedding is not just this came out several years ago. It's not just about Greek weddings. This is just a metaphor for parents and in-laws and all sorts of stuff. So the quick answer is every culture has their equivalent of a big fat Greek wedding. People are families are in your business. They want the best for you, but they want you to work and you pick yourself by your bootstraps, all sorts of things like that. So the quickie answer is that oftentimes, is that the biggest degree with the hardest school that makes the most amount of money, with the biggest house, the nicest car, all that stuff, somehow some version of that, maybe not exactly like that, but some version of that ends up in our heads. And
as the only acceptable way
as the
to
best
be
way,
successful.
The first way, the best way, the only way. So some version of the best and the biggest and the fanciest and the stuff like that. And a lot of it is not narcissistic, not narcissistic, not self-love, but the idea to show that you work hard and you come from good stock, you come from good stock, from good family, who cared about you, and you value intelligence and intellect and knowledge and all sorts of stuff like that. And so sometimes that's automatic. Somehow it's painted in our brain that this is what's some version of that. And the answer is, you can be extremely, extremely successful if you kind of redefine it your way. It's not that you ignore best schools or majors that increase the chance of making more money, but you realize that it may not be 100% you. That bits and pieces of that may be you, maybe none of it. But there are other pieces that sometimes you have to go hunting. It may not be in your church, it may not be in your synagogue, it may not be in your family, but you have to go hunting. And that's what being young is all about, is to explore. I'm not saying explore heroin. I'm saying exploring your options and opportunities, your talents, your interests. And a lot of times that means you have to travel, you have to read, you have to talk to people, so you can understand more of what's out there, so that you feel more secure in trying to make a decision or a choice or a path for yourself. Not that it locks you in forever, but that's what a lot of people, I think, are afraid nowadays, is they're afraid of making a choice, having children, not having children, moving to this town, not moving to this town, taking this job. They're afraid that if they pick it, it's wrong, they're going to be stuck.
Yeah, absolutely.
They've lost time and money because they tried this thing and didn't work out. But like we said before, all these are lessons, and this is the problem. All these are lessons along the way. Now, some of them, you'd like to cut your losses if things are terrible for you, a relationship or a job or a town. You want to be able to cut your losses and not hang out for years. But that's important, and this is a challenge. This ability to do the juggling. And sometimes our parents and our teachers and our schools don't do that for us. They don't show us there's certain paths. There are other paths you may have to explore because we don't know. I'm a chemistry teacher. I know biochemistry. I may not know. I know some other things, but I may not know everything that you may have options for out there. I
certainly think that what I experienced that with education. I shared in the previous episode that my my school, my high school, it was a public high school, but still it was like the only option for just about everybody was to go to college,
Yes.
That was all we were prepared for, all we were trained for. It was the only really thing that was even mentioned as in, it was sort of kind of like a throwaway, or, if you're not good enough to go to a 4-year college, I guess you could always go to vocational school or
2-year school, and
or join the military if you have to, or something like that, which is a very disparaging way to view those other choices, which are not just equally good, but could end up in dramatically more income and purpose and all kinds of stuff.
It could be literally life-saving to pick something that's not a 4-year college. Literally, it could be life-saving.
And I think that that. It's so important that you say it like that, because the rigidity, this very specific expectation of what success is, the 4-year college thing, the 2-parent family and the 2.5 kids, like if people aren't given permission to, and if they don't realize that they can give themselves permission to choose which of those expectations to hang on to and to live by, that it literally can end in death.
Right.
That the despair becomes so overwhelming, the self-hatred for not being able to live up to this expectation, the regret, the longing, whatever it is, that unfulfilled feeling can be so persistent and just tear a person down all the way to nothing.
That's right. Both physically, psychic death, a psychological death, the suicide, and et cetera, and physical illness that leads to death. Yeah, so that's a challenge. And the problem is we want to belong to a group.
Sure.
And if our group plays soccer and goes to party at Friday nights and stuff like that, and all these 4, 5, 6 everything, and then but you go to a different path than the rest of your friends. You're kind of an outsider, unless your friends are kind and accepting, all those very special friends, which is always important, by the way. And that's you want to belong, and oftentimes what you belong is the same. The same group tends to do. I went to University of Illinois because my friends went to University of Illinois, and blah blah blah. It wasn't because I had deep knowledge about any other schools anywhere else. So anyway, I belonged at some level.
I'd like you to share briefly again the little anecdote that you gave us in the last episode about your choice not to do the match program after you finished medical school and instead deciding to do something slightly different.
A lot different.
And how why did you make that choice, and what about yourself led you to make that choice? Yeah.
Well, a lot of stuff is because we work in the mental health field. We help run an ketamine clinic. A lot of stuff is mental health, and I didn't realize it whenever I went to the University of Illinois as an undergrad. I became severely depressed. This was in 1982. I did not know what the word depression, even though my mom was bipolar. Nobody ever sat down and said, "You kids are at risk for this." And I became severely depressed. Not practically non-functional, but I ground through, and everything was a burden. Getting up, opening up a book, turning in homework. Everything was just an enormous burden, and I was drowning. I literally was drowning. I didn't know what was happening. I just thought I was dumber than I realized and stuff like that. We didn't even have AP in my high school. We haven't even heard of advanced placement credit, let alone had it.
Yeah.
And some of my friends on the same dorm floor had come from a well-to-do northern suburb of Chicago, and they already had 27, 28 credit hours, college credit
Going
hours.
into college.
And I had never even heard of advanced placement credits and stuff like that. So I was behind in select ways. It was not that I was dumb, but I was severely depressed. I didn't recognize what the signs and symptoms were. So that was way back in high school into undergrad. So unfortunately, people don't realize this and physicians don't talk about this. Typically within a couple of years of the first bout of depression, you can go into spontaneous remission. So it turns out that I kind of went into a spontaneous remission about the sophomore year, and it did fairly well from then on for my undergrad, et cetera. But then the depression kind of came back, and I still had not recognized it. I had still not diagnosed myself or et cetera. And so in med school, I liked understanding and learning. I liked human physiology, cell biology, but I just didn't understand what was happening to me, and it made it super hard to kind of study. Anyway, so finish, and I loved seeing patients. That was my third and fourth year in medical school. My first 2 years are book years, and then my last 2 years are you do stints in different parts of the hospitals and clinics. So I kind of understood that I like to think deeply about problems.
Right.
I didn't want to necessarily do surgery and all sorts of stuff. But these nuances I didn't quite understand about myself. And this is where people say, well, you're good at math. You must want to, become an accountant become a scientist.
Yeah.
The answer is you like a certain part of theoretical math that does not allow you to become an accountant or stuff like that. So you got to be careful about these. People want to shadow me because I'm a physician. There's a lot of things that are medical or health related or people related or biology related that does not involve seeing patients at midnight.
Sure.
So this is kind of the nuances I think that I would wish that people would understand whenever they're younger and explore more things. But anyway, so it came to the point where I recognized I was going to be jumping into residency that I was not sure about and all sorts of different things. I pictured myself doing research, but I was I had two terrible research experiences, undergrad and med school, probably because of me, partly because of my how my brain was oriented. Regardless, what happened was that being set free whenever I didn't have to do the match, didn't have to get locked into something I wasn't sure about, and I went to the person I was doing a little bit of research with and said, "Hey, I can't do rat research, rodent research." He said essentially, do a year, it's called a transitional year, do a year and get your ability to get your Missouri state license so you can go support yourself so your parents don't have to support you. That's what residents are able to do, to get paid to be a resident and also moonlight on the side. But so that kind of set me free, and I think that freedom, I'm able to be self-sufficient if I'm set free, and my brain gets locked into that, got to, have to, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that freedom, not to be lazy, not to just bum around, but to kind of beat my own path it turns out it was really, really important for me.
Sure.
And I never really realized that. I just kind of found my way, but I never realized it. I never vocalized that.
Right.
And whenever I look at people, sometimes I see that. I remind them sometimes you don't need more medicines from us. Sometimes you need a different life situation.
Sure.
And that's a challenge. It's a challenge. But people would rather take a pill or an infusion or a shot than potentially change where they live or who they live with or
Yeah.
what part of the country or all sorts of stuff like that. Yeah.
So 2 things I identify in that situation was, number one, you had to be brave.
Mm-hmm.
You had to be brave to do that. It was a brave choice to sort of go against the grain, go against what everybody else in your in-group was doing.
Right.
And make this choice for you that you knew, maybe not all the way specifically.
I was not aware. Yeah.
Right, of how much better it was going to suit you, suit
Right.
your skills
Right.
and your personality and all that kind of stuff. But
Right.
you made a brave choice. And then the other thing too is that you had to, it required you to decide which expectations you were going to hang on to for yourself, right? Like,
Yes.
I mean, obviously you still wanted to be a hardworking person. You
Right.
still wanted to be a doctor, all
Right.
that kind of stuff. But you were letting go of the expectation that you have to go directly into a match and into a residency and follow that path.
And it's embarrassing. I'm not saying that it was easy once I did. It was embarrassing. It was shameful that I didn't do the match. When people said I match here, where did you match? I'm like, ugh. It's like people asking you, how's your marriage going? It's like, well, I'm separated. Or I'm divorced.
Sure.
It's like, it's like you're doing the right thing for yourself and you're trying to work hard, but it's really a lot of. The optics, the perspective of other people, they don't know what to say. They'll look away, they mumble, they won't, they say, oh, okay, and they walk away.
Sure.
So that's part, I think that's important for young people to understand is that that they can still say soundly and securely, or even if they're not sure, say, I'm not sure, and say, be secure.
Yeah.
And they're saying, I'm not sure.
Right.
But also recognize that people, including your own family, this is the kicker, friends and family, people who love you, people who support you in all sorts of ways, all of a sudden may not know what to say and how to say it.
So, but it's almost like there's two parts to that, because like you can do every single thing that your family or that your advisors or whatever, all the steps that people are telling you to, and then arrive there and not be happy,
Right. That's right.
and not function and not be successful or fulfilled. And the flip side of that is you have to be willing to risk a little discomfort in those things in order to figure out what is going to be best for you.
Yeah, it's a lot of discomfort. There's some freedom. Quietly by yourself, there you feel freed.
Yeah.
But if you're facing your family, your parents, the people who paid for stuff, and like saying, I'm not going to go the path,
Right.
it's very extremely disconcerting. It's extremely physically. I mean, your butterflies in your stomach
Sure.
and sick to your stomach and all sorts of stuff like that.
But I think it's a really important developmental step to coming into your own sense of self-worth.
That's a good point. Yes, it is a type of developmental, right?
And identity and just self-knowledge.
Yes.
Because we see a lot of people at our clinic who, by the society standards,
Right.
have degrees and nice houses and nice cars
Right.
and children that are successful and do great things, who are deeply unfulfilled, who are depressed, who are anxious, who are traumatized, who do not have good insight into their situation or why any of their life choices may have ended them, up where they are there. So that's why we wanted to talk about this, right? Is that
The answer is it's okay. Within
Yes.
certain, you're not going to shout it from the mountaintop.
Right.
I decided not to do this, or I decided to skip this, or I decided
I've given up brushing my teeth.
Right. So you're not going to
Yeah.
you're not going to yell it from the mountaintop. But,
Right.
But within certain circles, in front of your
Yeah.
therapist, your loved one, whomever
Right.
else, your minister, your rabbi, in front of them, and to be accepted and said, you know what, I know that you're struggling, and if you say that you want to do this, let's see, let's
Yeah.
do it. Let's see what we can do to help and stuff like that. And sometimes people just say, well, I love you, and call me if you need money or this and that. Just let me know. No questions asked. Literally, the words "no questions asked." We're here to help is enough to set people off to go to do their stuff without having to ask
Yeah.
anymore. It's like really, you don't have to sleep on somebody's sofa or take their money, and
Right.
just say if you want a place to stay or if you want money for this, it's here. I'm not going to question about how hard you're working or whatever,
Right.
how you're spending it. That's enough for a lot of people to say, I'm getting the right type of support. Yeah.
We could definitely go on and on and on about
Sure.
this. I think a good wrapping point is honestly what you're bringing up there at the end, just like how we can help support people who
Right.
are in this kind of like self-discovery process on their own
Mm-hmm.
as well too. I think a huge thing that we can do to support people there is just to say, I trust you.
Right.
You know, like if someone's wanting to make a choice, try something different, go out on a limb, you break the mold, whatever
Sure.
words we want to describe, is that we need to tell people that we trust them. I trust you. And that can be enough sometimes, just like you said, to give people a vote of
That's right.
confidence. Like, okay, I can
And this
try
includes
something
young people
different
who
here.
don't know
Yeah.
much. I
Right.
mean, and this is the hard part, is that young people. I mean, there's certain things that are permanent. You know, if they want to jump off of a building without a parachute, you're going to have to say, hey, this may not.
Yeah,
this is
right.
probably not going to work,
Sure.
no matter how much I believe
Yes.
in you. So certain things are kind of permanent, and it's called, I want calculated risk, not
Yeah.
any risk.
Absolutely.
You know, let's take a fistful of pills with vodka and let's see what happens. No. That is not okay.
Right.
So, but calculated risks and understanding that people may not, have a place to stay or sleep and other things like that. They may have to couch surf. They may have to come back home. It's important. It turns out, and this is the hard part. It turns out you may have maybe 3, 4, 5 really big decisions in your life that will make life. Who you date and who you marry. What kind of profession, where you live. It's hard to live in the outer areas of Alaska and become a multimillionaire
Sure.
by yourself. So this is why people congregate in big cities and stuff like that. So there's certain things that are really big decisions that are turning points in people's lives.
Yeah.
How you invest early on in life. All these things make a big decision. Tons and tons of lots of things that you can make, lots of errors, usually cut your losses short, and you'll still come out really, really fine.
Yeah.
And this is hard for people to understand. They think that every decision, everything is a make it or break it. The answer is literally 3, 5 big decisions in your life that make or break kind of a big stuff. And even then you can recover.
Right, absolutely. You're not stuck.
You're not stuck.
You're
Even
not
if
stuck.
if you have to get a divorce or you get wiped up, bankruptcy, it's not. And this is the hard part. This is the difficulties for people to understand. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much,
Sure.
Dr. Tadros. That was another great discussion.
Thank you.
And as always, guys, you can send your questions, feedback you can email us at notyourdocpod@gmail.com. Find us on YouTube, Spotify, Facebook, and also our website at notyourdoc.com. We've got links to all of our episodes there. Coming up on 40 episodes, right, Seth?
This is
I
it.
believe so. I think this is 39.
All right, yeah, coming up soon. We're going to have, some more interviews, stuff like that coming up later. Notyourdoc.com, all the episodes, Dr. Tadros' blog, all the good stuff.
Yeah.
Thanks again, guys.
I
Dr.
think our
Tadros.
50th episode, I
Seth.
think Dr. Tadros has taken us out to dinner, right? So
Oh,
We'll
yes.
go
Great.
skiing. We'll go skiing.
Yeah, we'll go live
very
from,
different from each other, but okay.
something. All right, thanks, guys. See you later.
All right. See you. This previous podcast represents my opinions and the opinions of my guests. This is not medical advice, and I'm not establishing a physician-patient relationship with any listener. The content here should not be taken as medical advice. The content here is for informational purposes only, and because each patient is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions that you may have.